good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Law News. This is a podcast and webinar that is brought to you by Digital Law and hosted by Anson Evaluate. So just in case some of you don't know, Digital Law is a small law firm that's based in the UK, in Barnsley, and it specialises in anything to do with digital and technology matters such as international data transfers, data protection and cybersecurity. So I'm joined today by the Managing Director of Digital Law, Peter Wright, and the Managing Director of Anson Evaluate, Heather Anson. So I'll just pass it over to them to introduce themselves.
Thank you very much, Laura. Welcome, everyone. And yeah, it's interesting, great to have a slightly bigger panel today, just to go through a few of the main news stories of the week, just to give you a flavour of the sort of things that we discuss when we are trying to advise our clients from all over the world on the issues they need to think of when it comes to everything from international data transfers to data to cyber to online e-commerce and various other issues. If it's digital, we advise on it. Heather.
Excellent. Well, I'm Heather Anson, and of course, I'm Managing Director of Anson Evaluate, which produces this podcast, and I'm happy to join you guys today. We at Anson Evaluate provide hosting for webinars like this, but across the board, our goal is to help people thrive and survive in digital age, regardless of the circumstances, whether it be GDPR or COVID-19.
Great. So let's get started straight on to our first story, which is regarding the Facebook and international data transfers. So this one is a story, so the title was Irish Privacy Watchdog orders Facebook to stop sending user data to the US. So the island's Data Protection Commissioner has sent a preliminary order to Facebook in order for them to stop transferring data from the EU to the US, signalling a potential crackdown on big tech companies' data sharing practices. So this order was sent in late August, and now Facebook have until the end of September to contest a provisional ruling that standard contractual clauses cannot be used as a mechanism to share EU data with the US, and failing to comply with this could result in a monetary penalty.
Yes, and I think It's my fault that this is coming in today.
Yeah, definitely.
It is indeed, and it's a further example of now the consequences of the Schrems decision from a few months back. And Heather, I think this is the first sort of concrete example of the impact of that. The lack of any foreseeable political or solution being agreed between the EU and the US means that, let's face it, one of the big players here, Facebook, is now starting to see the consequences of that.
Correct. But interestingly enough, if you look into this, you would think this would make Max Schrems, who is the named defendant on these cases, in fact, this Schrems 2 decision, you would think he would be thrilled about this, but he's not actually. He is actually planning on contesting this action, oddly enough, and filing an interlocutor complaint saying that this is essentially a game of whack-a-mole, that Ireland is doing this in order to do anything much bigger that would actually impact Facebook. He doesn't think this is actually going to do anything. He thinks this is intentionally done to slow roll the problem. And the main focus of this is to say that because Privacy Shield has gone away, you can't use these standard contractual clauses, which is one of Max Schrems' points. However, he wants the entirety of what Facebook does looked at, and he has been in a fight with the Irish BPC for about 7 years now. And this is just part of this, and his complaint is, this is not part of my complaint. My complaint is much larger. You're avoiding actually addressing my complaint in its entirety by doing this.
Indeed, and it's just showing that ultimately the impact now of there being no privacy shield and the fact that now it's just the standard contractual clause is the one thing that's allowing data to be exported, and now indeed Schrems is looking to take those on and potentially take them down, which then suggests, well, how possibly could data then be export? How could you have international data transfers in that case? So it very much goes to the heart of the fact that these agreements have allowed international data transfers and the development of big tech and social media platforms like Facebook over the last 15, 20 years. But he's actually going after to the heart of, can these systems actually continue? Should they be able to continue?
And the question on the corporate side and the business side is, if Max wins and he's right, how do we actually function in a digital society where data is being transferred all the time? What is his end game? What does he want other than to basically burn it all down and stop everything from happening? Because I sometimes wonder.
Indeed, to quote Michael Caine in Christopher Nolan's Batman, some people just want to watch the world burn, don't they?
Great. So I think we've covered everything on that one. So moving on to the next story then, this is about Amazon. So there's actually two views on this story. So there was the one where Amazon are finding a lot of fake reviews, one-star reviews on things that are having impacts on people's business, but also the other side of it where people are having a lot of fake reviews that are really good, and it's obviously impacting their business in a good way, but maybe for the wrong reasons. So this came to light when the Competitions and Market Authority believed that the 23 billion pounds of online shopping in the UK is influenced by reviews. So a girl called Ella Keys actually had a flourishing business selling post-pregnancy products on Amazon. She had over 60 reviews and was very positive reviews and making around £3,000 a month. And then she got a flurry of one-star reviews, which she thought were fake reviews as well. And her business just completely dropped off the cliff. So it just shows how much of an effect the fake reviews and things like that can have on people's businesses.
Yes, this is a very interesting story, given that the research suggests, certainly the UK competition regulator there, the CMA, they're suggesting that the majority of people's purchasing decisions online are based on user feedback in some way, shape or form. And the issue here is the weighting of those. You could have 20 positive 5-star reviews, but if you then get anything below a 4.5-star review, that starts to drag your rating down rapidly. And Ella here had a flurry of negative reviews, which appear to have been fake, randomly generated from reviewers overseas that actually had never even purchased or had anything to do with the products that she was selling. But nonetheless, a mini tsunami of these fake reviews came in, and that literally meant that her business, in her words, jumped off a cliff, as it says there. So you can see from that this is no laughing matter sort of thing, insofar as these reviews have a very clear, real world impact. And yes, it's possible, the issue of people having false 5-star reviews is well known. But here it seems it's possible to torpedo a vendor's reputation pretty easily through the use of these fake reviews.
Yeah, completely. Because I know when. Oh, go on, Heather. After you.
Sorry. I was just saying, and what the websites like Amazon are trying to do are not necessarily addressing the problem either, because if you go on, a lot of times people just look at the overall average of reviews, and they won't necessarily read the reviews. But even if they do read the reviews, they may not pay attention to whether or not it's been marked as a verified purchaser. That's one of the things Amazon has done, is said, well, we will mark somebody if we can tell that they've actually purchased this product, we will mark their review as a verified purchaser. But people rarely take the time or even understand the difference between the review being from a verified purchaser and not, and whether the overall review is included in that.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I was reading a bit more into this, and it seems like a lot of small retailers basically seeing that they have competition, and some not necessarily creating bad reviews on their competitors themselves, but maybe getting someone else to do it, or basically generating loads of reviews so that they get business rather than other people. So little small independent like sellers are not really getting the business, and it's going to like other large ones that have like a reputable name. So it's making it hard for people to actually get a business up and running.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's also worth considering that while it is perceived that it is possible for smaller businesses to get a foothold in the world of digital online sales, there are problems like this in terms of the Amazon reviews. And it was only a few years ago that Google ended up being fined because of the perceived manipulation of its search algorithm, which meant that certain products, certain vendors would do well for a while and then would suddenly find that when people were doing searches on Google's marketplace, suddenly they'd start to drop down, and others, very often Google sponsored or sales that Google itself was actually selling, would then be put higher within the search results. So if you are a small player in this, it seems that you can end up being disadvantaged pretty easily, and it's not necessarily the level playing field that it might at first appear.
Unless you're an unsavory small one that decides it's going to purchase a bunch of positive reviews, which is sometimes what happens, which I think will lead us into the next story.
Indeed.
Not that one.
Which one was you on about?
That was about the UK actually finding a bunch of fraud accounts and taking them down. And that was these small, not the big businesses, but the small businesses actually going out and purchasing ads. These fraud accounts. That's where a lot.
I ended up adding that story in.
Sorry, I thought there were going to be two separate stories, but there was just one. Sorry.
No, sorry. Yeah, there were two sides of it, but because we've got a lot of stories, I just summarised it on one page.
Yep, my bad. Moving on.
Yeah. So moving on to the next one. So this is about a Chinese chip giant, the DMIC, are in shock after the US trade ban threat. So China's largest chip manufacturer's stock sank after the US revealed it could be its next trade ban target. So this would restrict suppliers from providing it without permission. So MISIC, sorry, I'm getting muddled up there, unable to update their software that is currently being used or in its US machines, or have any personnel from suppliers helping it to get them working. So this could obviously have effects in terms of cybersecurity and things like that, and not being able to update their products.
Indeed, this ties in with the fact that in the US they've already sort of blacklisted Huawei, and they're in the process of blacklisting TikTok. We'll be coming to that story later on. But this all fits into that pattern almost of economic nationalism by the current US presidential administration. There is a perceived risk of the SMIC having close links with the Chinese military, and on those grounds, therefore, a potential ban is being threatened. And the fact that in the US they have followed through on that ban as far as Huawei is concerned, and indeed then applied pressure to the US has then applied pressure to other partners like the UK to take similar action. This does actually make it very difficult for SMIC to continue in its current form, because those are, of course, major markets for its products. So this is part of a pattern, really, in terms of the US trade pattern over the last few years. And I suspect that Heather has even more detailed views on that.
I just found it interesting, the in quotations, in shock after trade ban. And I think the term you guys use is that it's a bit of pearl clutching. And you're like, oh my, I didn't expect that. I'm sorry, but it's the U.S. under President Trump. Who is surprised at any sort of action like this? This shouldn't have come as a surprise to them. So I'm a bit dubious that they're surprised. However, it does highlight that this is an issue that not just the U.S. but the U.K. and other places are facing, in that if you're concerned about surveillance, if you're concerned about threats of interference, especially like right now, interference in democratic elections, then how far do you go? Do you have to wait until proof that these chips are going to be used in that manner, or should you look at secondary and tertiary information that says they might be? Is that where you would do it on? So it's trying to balance that sort of security concern in a world where one of the biggest suppliers of a lot of this technology comes out of China, whether they're private companies or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's probably another one that we'll be following, like we keep saying with TikTok and how that is going to be banned. Well, hoping to. So moving on to the next one. So this is regarding the supposed story around Dominic Cummings' plot to data revolution. So there was a story in the Times which suggested that the Conservative government is planning on introducing digital ID cards as part of a Dominic Cummings data revolution, leading to suggestions that the government are data grabbing, increasing mass surveillance and abusing their powers. However, this has not had any confirmation by the government, and there's nothing that they've said to suggest that they are going to do this. But this actually led on to a separate government announcement which said they are going to update their existing laws around digital IDs, and that in a year-long trial is going to take place called the Document Checking Service Pilot, which will involve passport verification systems.
Yes, this is an interesting story because I think the Times slightly got the wrong end of the stick in terms of what the actual story was here. It got picked up as being the return of ID cards, which Labour had originally wanted to introduce more than a decade ago. And indeed, one of the first things that David Cameron's coalition government did when it came in was to stop the ID card programme, which was costing billions of pounds. Now, we aren't talking here about, again, that collection of ID mandatory by everyone, and then, the civil liberties issue of you must go outside if you are unable to go outside if you're carrying this card, which was, I think, what really upset a lot of privacy campaigners at the time. Instead, this has been driven by the fact that apparently more than 1 million people who tried to access government support during the lockdown because of the coronavirus pandemic, more than 1 million people were accessing government help, support and funds for the first time that actually the government had no previous records of. Yes, they had birth certificates and things, but they hadn't been in previous receipt of government help or support. So there was no tracking data, no ID information there, and it meant that they ended up having to reinvent the wheel to be able to help this cohort of people. So where it's come from is the thought of, well, we need to therefore be collecting more data actively so that if we do then need to roll out these sort of schemes at short notice in the future, we're better able to do so. So hence, actually, it's that separate government announcement on the updating of existing laws that is the real news story here, really. And it's less about a sort of government overreach and ID cards for everyone than it is about actually making sure that government data is in a better place to react when they try and do large-scale schemes like this again in the future. And this actually comes back to the wider issues that the government has encountered during the pandemic, whereby in Boris Johnson's words, every time they try to pull a lever thinking, this will help when it comes to supporting the economy or to supporting healthcare, that lever seemed to come off in your hands. And it's a similar thing to try to make sure in the future the civil service is better placed to try and do some of these things rather than finding itself flailing around in the dark, which appears to have happened too often in 2020.
And I'm not going to weigh in on this too much because being a US citizen living here in the UK, I find your ID system very different and sometimes a bit weird. So, yeah, I will just let you guys get on with it.
No worries. Let's just move on to the next story then.
So says the Libertarian. We'll move on then. Okay.
Yeah, so this is just one I thought I'd add in here. So the ICO have fined a company £130,000 for unauthorised pensions cold calls. So a company called CAPS Advisory Limited, based in Swansea, has been fined £130,000 for making over 100,000 unauthorised direct marketing calls to people about their pensions. And this fine was under the Privacy and Electronics Communication Regulation. So the law regarding pensions actually changed in 2019. I think this, if I do believe correctly, this is one of the first signs in relation to the change in that law. And it just shows that the ICO, which I thought it was very important to add in here, the ICO are still carrying on and finding people, even though the pandemic has gone on, and they are back to business, basically.
Indeed, it's a very important point there, Laura, that enforcement continues. The other key thing I think to take away from this story is that, to be uninitiated, you may look at that headline and think, oh, well, it was cold calls, so it was probably people that weren't expecting that call, so therefore it's personal data being used for a different purpose. And you'd expect it to say that they were being fined under GDPR, but of course they aren't. It's Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulation, which is the extension of the e-Privacy Directive from 2002, as enacted in UK law in that regulation that is being used to make the fine. And that typifies the fact that not all fines and not all electronic communication is covered by GDPR. It was intended that we would have had an e-privacy regulation to cover these sorts of communications and fines, but in the absence of that, the law has been updated in 2019 to say, well, you have to be careful with these cold calls, and in particular in relation to things like financial services, because of course, scams. We have had people approach us at Digital Law who have been ripped off in the course of undertaking their financial services online, and it remains a large and growing threat to those who might sort of receive a cold call and think, oh, this is either my pension provider or someone trying to flog a pension service, and they end up potentially transferring huge sums of money and could lose their entire savings or pension pot as a result. So that's why the law has been tightened up on this, and hence very important that the ICO has put down a marker here by saying, yes, the law has changed, yes, we are enforcing it, yes, we're trying to look after those who are at risk. You make a good point there, Laura, with regards to saying, yes, enforcement is continuing, and we are, of course, hoping within the next few weeks that the ICO will be turning around and confirming that they are enforcing those fines against British Airways and Marriott for breaches of GDPR, which they've been appealing now for over 18 months, the appealing period for which was extended during the pandemic. But we expect those details of those final monetary penalties to be confirmed at some point this month. So watch this space.
Excellent. I also want to point out that this highlights something that I deal with clients a lot, and that is that distinction between, it's not all about GDPR, because I was like, well, it's GDPR. Is this compliant under GDPR? It's like, it might be, but it's not under the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation. So this is another aspect of it that people have to make sure they're complying with, and it may pass muster for GDPR, but it won't necessarily for PECR.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's just a good reminder that there is other laws other than GDPR
Really?
in relation to data.
Exactly, it is so important, and also I think the fact that we have these laws and they're being enforced hopefully stops the development of that cold call industry. And Heather, I know that things like boiler room scams are a big problem in the States, where you have these sorts of cold calls where they go and unsolicited call someone, say, oh, we've got this great financial product for you, but it's time sensitive, you have to buy now, pay now, and that ends up, that's the Jordan Belfort was a past master of that, who was immortalised by Leonardo DiCaprio in a movie a few years ago. But it typifies the fact that these sorts of scams have been a long time problem in the States, and it's taken a long time for regulation to sort of catch up. And these guys eventually to end up being caught and put in prison was the outcome there. But it's still a big problem, I think, in the States.
And the FCC is the agency, the federal agency. This is something that actually, even though the states is federalist and tend to have a lot of things happen at the state level, this is one that is a federal level because it crosses state lines, obviously. So that the FCC has been the one that's implemented like the no call lists and using that to be the basis for fines. So if somebody calls you and you've put your number on the no call list, or you've put them on the number of don't call me list, then the FCC can fine. That's one of the ways they've been doing that, and they've been doing that for a couple of decades now.
Yeah, good. I suppose it's similar to things like Ofcom in this country, where you can kind of like sign up that you don't want calls from certain companies.
And I think it's still the truth, but I don't know if you know, if you're getting a robocall, you can press 9, and that's supposed to be the electronic equivalent, because they thought they'd get around not being told verbally on the phone, don't call me anymore, that they would just do a robocall because you can't tell a robot that. But they had to implement if you hit 9, then that automatically they have to cut the call off, and they're not allowed to call anymore.
Oh, good. It's a good one I've never heard about.
Yeah, I didn't know if you knew that, but it does work.
So yeah, moving on to the next story. So this is coming back to the US again. So TikTok could be banned as Chinese app set up to miss Trump's deadline for sale in the US. So we've been speaking about this for probably, I'd say weeks, but it's probably months now, regarding the ban or deadline that the US put in place in order for the parent company of TikTok, Dance, to actually make a deal with a US company in order to sell that part of TikTok. So they was trying to secure a deal with Microsoft and Oracle. However, due to some new Chinese regulations, they have failed to do this. So they have until, I think it's 20th September to actually secure a deal, or the executive order that Trump put in place would mean that TikTok would be banned in the US.
Good luck implementing that one. If you don't mind, Peter, if I can start on this one, given this is my country, my lovely country. This is done in under the executive orders are something that we're hearing a lot more about in the last decade or so from presidents, because what it's doing is essentially bypassing Congress, which usually has to do these type of things. They've given the president authority for national security purposes to do all sorts of. He just has to say this is an executive order enforcing national security, and there are a lot of things he can do. This goes back to like taking money out of different areas of the military for the border wall, because he said, it's national security. So it's essentially bypassing the trade negotiation and approval powers of the Congress by implementing these executive orders under national security. Now, it doesn't mean that it's absolutely going to happen on the 20th, because he can decide to extend that, or he can also it can also be challenged in court so that it doesn't go ahead. He'd have to show a clear tie into there is a danger to the American public or America in general if they don't ban it. And banning something like TikTok in the U.S. would be tough technically wise. We don't have the infrastructure like other countries do to just shut something off.
Yes, and it was also interesting in this story. It was actually surprising to see such a detailed piece of tech reporting in The Sun, of all papers. But not only did it then cover the issue here with regards to TikTok, which we've been talking about on this podcast for quite some time on this webinar, it's also the fact that TikTok has recently been found to be in breach of Google's app rules, with so far as it was collecting private personal user data for over a year in contravention of those basic rules. And you can guarantee if it was doing that in breach of Google's app rules, it's probably in breach of European data protection rules as well. And that highlights the fact that we've got here a phenomenally successful app that is not American, it's Chinese, and simply the architecture of it will have probably allowed for the mining of user data in a way that is not consistent with different data protection and privacy laws around the world. As I say, this is an app that has tens of millions of US users that are using it, that are in some cases becoming phenomenally wealthy as a result. But also the app is starting to get its problems. I mean, we see the well-reported problems on Facebook with regards to sometimes violent content, unsavory content that ends up, because it's popular, it ends up suddenly appearing on people's feeds, and it can actually end up circulating some quite nasty, upsetting content. That has happened to TikTok. They ended up having a viral link to someone committing suicide that was up on there for a long time, and it went viral. Different people were seeing it. Of course, the very powerful app, the algorithm on TikTok serve this thing up. So you just log into it, start scrolling, and this thing would then appear without any action performed by the user to sort of want to see it. It just appeared in people's feeds. So increasingly, they're going to have to start with such a large volume of users thinking more clearly about how do they properly regulate that content that ends up appearing that would breach basic taste and decency standards in most countries, but they'll have to have a better handle on making sure this sort of stuff doesn't go viral in future.
Yeah, I think linked to that as well, a lot of people are saying they need to introduce some safeguards as well. So maybe stopping the autoplay of their videos, because obviously a lot of people with that video in particular that you were talking about were sharing pictures of the start of it, and then obviously little kids would be on TikTok scrolling through and be able to see stuff. So rather than the video automatically playing, having to actually click on a video to actually view it rather than just seeing it automatically, because obviously although the algorithm would be there and you'd still see it, you've got then a choice as to whether you would view it.
Exactly, and that's also a very important point that you make, Laura, that a lot of TikTok's users, their demographic is very much on the younger end of the scale. So for younger users to then see this sort of stuff is even more upsetting, and actually illustrates the need for them to regulate their own content or for external regulators to start acting on this more thoughtfully. And overall, it's something that I think Facebook, Twitter, etc., they have said, if you don't want us to be circulating this stuff and you want better controls, then regulate us. And arguably this, again, suggests the need for that, and there actually to be some leadership development shown on a global level. Someone to take the lead in terms of actually doing something about this. But in our current fragmented world, that, of course, is quite difficult.
Yeah, currently I'd say the companies like TikTok and Facebook and all of these are caught between a rock and a hard place. You know, they're either censoring free speech and being gone after for being too much of a censor, and then the other side letting too many things up. And they said, well, you know, we are a public company. We're not a government-owned entity, so we can technically do what we want within the law. But you need to regulate us if you want there to be parameters. Otherwise, we're just going to do the best we can based on what we think should happen.
Yeah, completely. And regarding TikTok as well, obviously, we'll keep you updated in the next weeks and probably the week after what happens in regards to this. So I think this might be one of the last ones. So this is regarding 3D printing and the risk it poses to people's privacy. So 3D printing technology poses a grave and growing threat to individual privacy, says experts. People could use cameras, laptops or mobile phones to track and trace the origins of 3D printed objects and how they have been used if they have watermarks. So a new study shows that a lack of awareness around governments and companies regarding privacy issues associated with 3D printers, and they are calling for a change to treaties on copyright law and international human rights. And I think there was a little bit in this as well about the need for an implementing of a voluntary code of conduct for companies who do sell 3D printers and things like that, and limited on what information it can collect and show, and etc.
Yeah, it's interesting that this story came from an academic study that appeared to actually do a little bit more on sort of looking at the possible risks that are out there rather than, to a certain extent, the actual risks.
Yeah.
For example, it talks about the threat from watermarks, whereby the data that's sent to be printed could have a watermark in it that ends up then being integrated into the item that's actually been printed. And if then you're looking at, say, something that has been developed so that you could carry out, you know, we could be looking at medical equipment here, things that will be used in surgeries, then there could be a issue with regards to personal data, data protection, privacy, etc. But it almost seemed to be looking for things to find risk with. Almost was almost the tenet of the study. If you read behind the headline.
And I'm seeing the same thing with, say, for example, the track and trace apps. I know they're relaunching, or not relaunching, but launching the digital track and trace app here in the UK on the 24th. And I've talked and presented on panels with academics who look at the theoretical dangers of these, and it to the point where I challenge them to say, well, what is your responsibility to also look at the risk of scaring people into not using a track and trace app? As there are a lot of potential risks, but there are two things that can dramatically happen when you over report things, as it were, or like this is it's academic studies of the potential as opposed to the actual. And I tend to look at on one side there's people getting too scared and they won't download an app. And then there's the other side of it is the where you get so many warnings that you start tuning them out. And when I do that, I look at California regulation out of Proposition 65, I think it's called, which essentially has to do with warnings, that you have to put warnings on things if it has a potential to cause cancer, birth defects, or other congenital defects. And it's gotten so widespread and ridiculous that they have warnings on everything. Now, if you've ever been to a hotel in California, you will see a cancer warning over the breakfast bar saying that this room was cleaned with chemicals that may cause cancer. Tuna fish may cause cancer. Literally, if you go into Amazon, has a Proposition 65 label thing, how to help, and there are different categories, and one of them is fresh fruit and vegetables have to contain a warning that says this product may contain chemicals that can cause cancer. Fresh fruit and vegetables. So people in California, it may be just they think, oh, we're informing people of this, but what they're really doing is over warning to the point where people become numb. They're just like, everything's cancer. They're going to put warning on coffee now, even though you can't drink enough coffee for the potential chemical that they've fed to high doses injected in high doses in rats and caused a tiny increase in tumors. You would have to drink 160 cups of coffee a day to even come close to the minute increase in cancer risk. But because it's there, we have to put a warning on coffee.
Yeah,
So
I think that's
the tipping point with this.
Yeah, I think that highlights the importance, though, of like getting the right balance in between like reporting about risks when, like Peter was saying before, when we were talking about a different story, like when it's actually happened and when people are suspecting there's going to be an issue with it, not reporting too soon, but not obviously leaving it too late as well.
Yeah, and the public has a tendency not to be able, in news stories particularly, to just be able to distinguish between a potential risk and an actual risk, one that is happening. Like we see with the opposite effect is these vaccinations. So the anti-vaccination movement is based on people not understanding potential risk versus actual risk, and just going with, I'm not going to do anything with that.
Great. So I think, just one more story. So this is regarding, I think this is in relation to one of the news stories we talked about the other week, when New Zealand were issuing some guidance about cybersecurity threats. So the UK has joined international allies in issuing cyber defence advice for organisations. So the NCSC have released some guidance last week with international allies aimed at helping organisations stay safe from malicious cyber attacks. So the Joint Cybersecurity Advisory Technical Approaches to Uncovering and Remediating Malicious Activity has been published in conjunction with other associations in relation to cybersecurity, so the US Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, the Australia Cyber Security Centre, and so on.
Indeed, interesting that they've taken given the upturn in digital commerce this year. Of course, there have been increased threats from a cybersecurity perspective. But interesting, the lead here is coming from what is in effect the agencies for cybersecurity within the Five Eyes intelligence partnership. So hence the NCSC is, of course, the the sort of public-facing wing of GCHQ, the government's security and defence listening post. And here they've ended up working in partnership with their counterparts with the other Five Eyes countries of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. I think, the NCSC was only founded in 2015 in the UK. And we're starting to see the real impact now of both having at a national level the ability to look at patterns, to have a defence system, and to try and identify malicious cyber actors around the world. And then now we're seeing the power of that being able to link in with 4 other comparative organisations in some of the world's largest economies. So hopefully it will serve to ensure a slightly greater degree of security for the organisations within those territories. You only have to take a look at the NCSC website to see some of the great free resources that are on there to help businesses hopefully make themselves a little bit more secure. And this really is, this issuing of more advice builds on that.
And I think one of the concerns that is also pushing this forward is the interference in elections. So especially given COVID-19, there's going to be a more push for electronic or online voting systems or things like that, and just the election interference issue is a big deal, and that's not going to be down to there are organizations that run these campaigns, that run elections, not just governments, obviously, because governments shouldn't be running their own elections, and it will. Yeah, this is hopefully going to help with that as well.
Yeah, great. So that's everything we've got time for today. So just a little reminder, we've currently got a special offer on our GDPR compliance manual for legal practices. So this was co-produced by Anson Evaluate, Digital Law, and is it BLM, Peter? Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
so this was that's the one. So the manual was originally priced at £195 and is now down almost 50% to £99, with just an extra £5 for postage and packaging. So I'll just pass over to Peter to talk a little bit more about it.
Thank you, and I'm actually going to pass over to Heather to talk about this, because usually our viewers and listeners get to hear me talk about it, but given that this was very much a project that Heather steered to completion, I'll let Heather talk about it.
Yes, I was one of the contributing authors along with Peter, but also this was a project that I thought was important. It's one of the things that is part of the Anson Evaluate ethos, is having materials that are about subjects that people find overwhelming sometimes, but have them accessible. So a lot of research went into this, and previous manuals I've written or contributed to, in how to present the information that can be somewhat complex in ways that's straightforward, that's easy to access, divided up into sections so that if you have a specific role within a company, particularly a law firm, then you can, if you have a specific role, then if you flip to that section, you can just read that. You don't have to read it cover to cover, like a lot of things. There's that ability to do this. That's really the goal behind it, and we've had really tremendous feedback on it, and people have really enjoyed. I can't say they've enjoyed GDPR from it, but they've found it incredibly useful and quite straightforward and easy to use.
Great. So if you do want a copy of the GDPR manual or have any other questions about anything related to this webinar or podcast, just drop us an email at either admin@ansonevaluate.com or admin@digitallawuk.com as well. So just a reminder to everyone, this webinar is recorded live. However, it is available on demand through our YouTube channel, through our website, or through a podcast channel as well. So yeah, it's not usually recorded at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. So we'll see you all next week, and thank you for listening. Goodbye, everyone.